Hello and welcome to part 2 of creating a perfect page turner with me, Louise Mumford. I am the author of Sleepless and I am here to take you through the next couple of steps for creating that page turner that you've got in your head. So we have thought about creating an elevator pitch in the first session, and we thought about structure, the 3-act structure in particular. So now we're going to come into plotting in a little bit more detail. So, big secret, I don't really plot before I write a novel. This shocks quite a few of my author friends, I think. I don't really plot, and the story just kind of unfolds beautifully before me, which is nice. However, once I've finished my novel, I do go back and I do check then that everything makes sense, that I want all the bits where they should be, and a lot of changes happen at that point too. And these are some of the things that I'm thinking about when I'm going back and I'm thinking of plotting. So the first thing is misdirection or red herrings. Now, this applies probably more to crime novels again, though it can be used in thrillers and in other genres as well. So maybe you have set up this one character through the first act and it seems as if they're the person that would be responsible for the crime, and then in the second and the third act it all unravels and the detective discovers that it's not them at all. That's the easiest way to describe it. But what a lot of writers are doing now is actually using misdirection in a much cleverer way. So you've got the idea of the unreliable narrator. So you're reading a book, and probably Gone Girl is by Gillian Flynn is a brilliant example of this. You're reading that book and you think you have a handle on the character, the person who's narrating it, and then you get to that point in Act 2, that midpoint, and everything flips and you realise that what you've been told in the first act is not the whole story and you've got a lot more to learn in the second half of that novel. So have a think about misdirection, have a think about who is telling your story, which character do you want to tell your story, and what will they then withhold. Think about what they would tell you, even if it's a third person narration and you're not kind of right in the character's viewpoint. Think about which character you're most closely aligned with, what they're going to see and what they're not going to see as well. One thing I will say with misdirection and with red herrings as well, make sure that you give your reader a fighting chance to guess what actually is going to happen at the end, because it can be frustrating if you get to the end and suddenly this rabbit in a hat appears and you've had no warning of that previously. The best books are the ones that you flick back through and you go, they said it there and they mentioned it there and they did that thing there, and now I understand why that bit's at the end. So that's kind of what you're aiming for, definitely. The next thing then that I would think of would be your chapters. So I'm guessing that you're writing in chapters. Some authors don't. I think it's quite an easy thing for the reader. I'm always quite conscious of the reader and how I read. So I read often in bed at night, and I'll think, I'll just get to the end of that chapter. And I'm always thinking of the reader then. So I do write in chapters because I think it's quite easy to flick through and think, I'll just read that bit. But what you want them to do is you want them to override going to sleep and go on to the next chapter because you've hooked them in. So one way to do that is to keep your chapters fairly short. I write fairly short chapters. They're probably about 1,500 to 2,000 words per chapter. And think very carefully about where the chapter ends. So for example, in Sleepless, I had a character who died at the end of the chapter. And then going back and looking at the book and, doing what I was doing, which was kind of going through and and working out what was working and what wasn't, I realised that actually that chapter shouldn't end on his death. I should hold that piece of information to the next chapter. You want your reader to turn over and start reading the next chapter to find out what happens to that character. And so actually I ended the chapter with, you know, Thea just about realising what's going to happen. She reaches out to try and help him, to try and save him, and the chapter ends there. And then in the next chapter we discover that he's died. Now again, it can't be that kind of dramatic for each of your chapters, because you will exhaust your reader if you do that. But you can do quieter, you know, kind of cliffhangers at the end of chapters. So if your character is going to a new job, for example, you know, you take them up to the door of that new office building and you leave them there, and then they go in the next chapter. Hopefully then your reader wants to turn the page to discover what their job is like, and whether they're going to cope, and all of those things. Yeah, so really look at your chapters, analyse them really carefully. And I'm also a big one for, if you're writing and you want to keep readers turning the page, I really do analyse whether I need absolutely every sentence in that chapter. Sometimes I think as writers we get a little bit carried away, don't we, with these beautiful lush descriptions of things, or these amazing similes and metaphors. It's similes and metaphors for me. I love a good simile, I love a good metaphor. And you know, reading back through again, putting my reader hat on, do I need another simile at that point, or do I just want to know what happens next? And if it's I just want to know what happens next, then, you know, be aware of when you're perhaps being a little bit self-indulgent. So then the final one, which I'm moving on to, is characters. So there's a lot of talk about you have to have a likeable main character. And I would actually argue against that. I don't think you do have to have a likeable main character. You have to have a relatable main character, maybe, or a character that interests, fascinates you enough to keep reading. I don't think they have to be likeable. People aren't likeable. There are thousands and thousands of books about, you know, serial killers and all of those kind of things. We love villains, you know, they're not likeable. So I think you've got to find what makes your character interesting, not necessarily likeable. And there's a really good example of this. It's a TV series which was on one of the streaming services. It was called I Care a Lot. And the main character of that is thoroughly horrible. She is a woman who basically takes the inheritance funds and houses from these vulnerable older people. She puts them then into the care system. And she's just awful. But you keep watching because you want to know what she's going to do next. You're fascinated by what she's going to do next. You keep watching for her comeuppance as well. And the genius of the writing in that television show is that you also keep watching because there are flashes where you actually sympathise with this woman. She says something at one point about something to do with, you know, how she's treated as a woman. And I remember when I was watching it thinking, oh yeah, well I understand that. I get where she's coming from. And that is the skill, is it's creating this fully rounded character. Because, you know, even despicable people, you know, they might have a cat that they like, you know, or they might like going to the aquarium, whatever it is. You know, they are also human. They're despicable, but they are also human. So think about that. Now, the other thing about characters is that they have to be, and your main character has to want something, and that pushes the story forward. So for example, in my thriller, Thea just desperately wants more sleep. That's what she wants. And then the story unfolds because she is desperately hunting that down. But apart from what your character wants, so again, it might be they want that new job. They want to find Mr. Right. They want to find the magical, mystical, Indiana Jones style stone that will avoid the apocalypse, whatever it is that they want. But your characters also have to have something that they need, and they might not even be aware of what it is that they need. But if you're bringing your story round into kind of a lovely kind of circle at the end, that's what they get at the end. They get what they need and not necessarily what they want. And so my example for that one, again from Sleepless, is that Thea does want sleep, but what she needs is also more of she wants friendship, and she wants a circle of people around her. She's kind of closed herself off due to exhaustion. She's cut herself. She lives a very solitary life. So by the end, she actually does have, friends and a community, and she has been the person that they've all looked to as well to help them out of this horrific situation. So she's felt needed as well. She hasn't felt like she's on the periphery of life, which is how she started off in the beginning of the novel. So I kind of took, and that's an emotional character arc. You've got to think of how your characters progress during the novel. They don't always have to learn something, don't have to have that kind of preachy moment at the end, but they do have to have made some sort of progress, because that's what hooks your reader in. It's how your character is moving forward, it's how they are developing as a character. That emotional arc is really important. So, in conclusion then, for creating a perfect page turner, have a think about your elevator pitch. Have a think about the structure of your work. If you've written it, go back to it, have a look if it works, if there are those climax points, if you've got those ups and downs, the slow bits, the fast bits, if there's a balance to it. Have a think about misdirection and red herrings. Definitely have a think about your chapters and really look at those in kind of forensic detail and check that they are working as hard as they can, because they have little mini arcs almost in them. Something, you start off at one point, end the chapter, and something has changed by the end of that chapter. It could be emotional, it doesn't have to be like a physical change. And then have a think about your character as well, because readers like stories with characters that are interesting, fascinating, just they're characters that they want to spend time with, which is what they're doing. When they're reading your book, they are spending time with your characters. Are these people that you want to spend time with, either because you like them or because you find them fascinating? And I think that's about it. If you want some good, what I think are good page turners, apart from my book, Sleepless, you can think about Gone Girl, which is by Gillian Flynn, which I mentioned. It has that change of narrator halfway through, which is very interesting. You can think about Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling. I mean, she nails the whole idea of a page turner, and you've got those very kind of climactic battles often at the end of her books. You can think about The Girl on the Train, Paula Hawkins. That's a really kind of good page turner again, keeps you guessing. And I mean, Stephen King is probably the master of page turners. He's created some of the most lasting stories with characters that have stayed with us for years, that have become kind of part of the horror lore, isn't it? So definitely have a look, or just watch a film and see if you can spot any of the things that I have mentioned. Good luck with your writing. I hope you create a perfect page turner.